Personality. So this entire personality unit is going to focus on the way people think, feel, and act. The field of personality is dominated by the views of Sigmund Freud. When Freud was working under the psychoanalytic perspective, he said that many of his patients suffered from what he called nervous disorders. Those nervous disorders had no physical causes, so he said it all had to be mental. That led Freud to come up with the idea, the theory of personality, which says that people have an unconscious mind and go through psychosexual stages of development and protect themselves from anxiety through the use of defense mechanisms. So we're going to talk about what it means to have an unconscious mind, what those psychosexual stages are, and what defense mechanisms exist in our world. First, let's talk about the unconscious mind. Freud said that our mind is a reservoir which holds a lot of unacceptable thoughts, wishes, and feelings and memories. And those things are housed in a way to protect us from harm. Anything that exists in your unconscious mind is there because it's out of sight, out of mind. You're not thinking about it because you don't want to think about it. So people went to Freud when they wanted to bring those things outside of their unconscious awareness. They wanted to bring them to consciousness. Freud is the reason that most people think of therapy as going in and lying on a couch and talking about your feelings. That's because he asked his patients to do what's called free association. Free association is a way for people to tap into their conscious mind. It's kind of like free writing. You go in to see a therapist and you talk about whatever's on your mind. So for Freud, free association was a chain of thoughts that would often lead people to painful and embarrassing things about their life. Freud said that when people can uncover those memories and release them, they can feel better. And if you look at the picture, you can see a man there and the image of a woman, a naked woman, as his face. That's kind of because a lot of what Freud said was unconscious sexual issues. So let's look at the model of the mind, which says that our mind is like an iceberg. At the very bottom are things that are hidden and below the surface and deep. It's unconscious to us. Consciousness means awareness. So if it's unconscious, you're unaware. They're all of the things that are very deep down in your life. The pre-conscious area are the things that are just below the surface. If you actually think about it, you could figure it out. And your consciousness is what's above the surface, the things that you know of, that you're aware of. For example, let's just say you are having a bad day. Let's say you're sad. Your conscious mind will tell you, this is not a good day, I'm feeling sad. If you think about it, you could tap into your pre-conscious and you could figure out, I'm having a bad day and feeling sad because I had an argument with my significant other this morning. So you could figure it out if you thought about it. But what Freud was concerned about is what's much deeper than that. So what's really driving your sadness? Is it that deep down inside you feel like that fight might lead to divorce, or it might lead to the end of the relationship? And that is what's really troubling you and causing you sadness. So by going to therapy and speaking to Freud and tapping into your unconscious, you could figure out that the real issue is your fear of abandonment and losing this person you love after an argument. And that's just a simple example. So what Freud said we do is we as a people have an ego that is there to protect us from any threatening thoughts that exist in our unconscious. And one way we are protected from those thoughts is through what's called defense mechanisms. These are things that we are unaware of that we're doing that we just naturally do to protect ourselves. Some of you will have heard of these defense mechanisms or you use them yourself, and they were created by Freud. The first one is the idea of repression. That's when you push things out of your you push things into your unconscious mind. It's like burying something. So if somebody says, "Oh, how's so-and-so?" and you're like, "Who?" As if you've totally forgotten about them. I haven't thought about that person anymore. That person no longer exists in my mind. You repress it, you put it out of mind. You put it away. Denial is not like the river. Denial is not accepting the ego-threatening truth. So if you are still driving by your ex's house and wanting to go inside, you might be in denial that the relationship is ended. Many people usually think of denial as kind of like stalkish behavior. It could be if a person is in denial so much that they continue to pester someone. Displacement, think of the word displacement. So you're going to displace, you're going to put your feelings somewhere else. Displacement is when you redirect your feelings towards another person or object, something that's usually less threatening. So parents who scream and yell at their children because they had a bad day at work would be displacing their anger onto their children. They know that they can't be angry with their boss, so they choose somebody who's less threatening, like their child. Projection is putting the feelings you have about something onto somebody else, kind of like a video projector projects an image onto a screen. You put your feelings onto someone else. So if you insist your ex still cares about you because you still care about them, that would be projection. If you go to a restaurant with your family and you order a Hawaiian style pizza and you say no pineapples, I mean, it's really not a Hawaiian style pizza, but you say, we don't like those, no pineapples, then you are projecting your feelings of not liking pineapples onto your whole family. In psychodynamics or modern therapy, we now call projection false consensus effect. And that's the tendency to overestimate the extent to which others share our same beliefs. So what Freud called projection, researchers now call false consensus effect. It's the same thing. Reaction formation occurs when people express the opposite of how they truly feel. So it's like in elementary school when boys and girls bicker and go back and forth with each other. And the boy says, "Oh, I don't like her, I hate her." But really, he has a crush on her, and that's why he's picking on her. So it's when you express the opposite feeling of how you truly feel. You might tell somebody you hate them when you really love them. Regression is not to be confused with repression. Regression happens when a person returns to an earlier, more comforting form of themselves. It's like when an adult sleeps with their favorite stuffed animal from their childhood, or they use their blankie, or they throw a temper tantrum because they don't get their way at work. They are regressing to their childhood. They're basically behaving like a child, because that's what worked with them and their parents. Rationalization occurs when a person tries to come up with a beneficial result even though they've had something undesirable happen. So if a student is trying to get accepted into a school and they get rejected, they might rationalize the situation by saying, "I didn't really want to go there anyways," or "it was too far away." So they make it beneficial to them. Intellectualization, it occurs when a person takes an academic, unemotional stance on a topic. So they intellectualize the issue instead of taking it onto their ego. So that same student who gets rejected by a school, instead of just accepting that rejection, they start doing research over all the people who don't get into their first desired school. They are intellectualizing the issue so that they don't have to think of it from a personal level. Sublimation occurs when a person channels the frustrations they might have towards something else. Sublimation or any of the defense mechanisms can be positive if they're used in a positive way. So channeling your frustration might be anytime you have a breakup, writing a song about it, like a famous singer does. You're channeling the frustration you might feel to something else. Or the people who have a breakup and then they go and they get a revenge body. That's sublimation because they're channeling the frustration they may have towards one thing towards something else. So those are all of the defense mechanisms. Freud also told us about personality and how it's developed. He said that a person's personality is often laid by the time they are 5 years old. The first few years of life, he said, were divided into what he calls psychosexual stages. And during these psychosexual stages, the id, our pleasure-seeking part of ourselves, seeks pleasure through what he calls erogenous zones. He also said that children deal with their immature sexual urges during different stages of development, and that also shapes their personality. If a person, according to Freud, became fixated in a certain stage, then they will fail to move forward as they are expected, which can lead to issues in adulthood. Those issues will dominate adult life. So let's take a look at Freud's psychosexual stages of development. And these stages are pretty controversial, but I just ask you for you to think about them objectively. So the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages are the psychosexual stages of development. And one way to remember oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital is only adults play love games. That's the mnemonic I usually have students remember. So only adults play love games. The oral stage, the first stage, according to Freud, happens between ages 0 and 1. He says that babies are erotically focused on their mouth because they are breastfeeding, they have a pacifier, all they do is eat and things like that. Okay, those are the key experiences. The anal stage happens between ages 2 and 3, and that is when children are focused on their anus. And that's primarily due to the fact that they're potty training. Their parents are potty training them. So there is a lot of focus on what's coming out of my body. The third stage, probably the most controversial, is the phallic stage, which occurs between ages 4 and 5. Freud says children are focused on their genitals and masturbating. They've started to notice their body parts, and they've also started to identify with their adult role models. So there's differences between boys and girls and how they look physically. I'm curious about this, so I'm exploring. The latency stage occurs between ages 6 and 12, which is the only time during development that Freud says all sexual expressions are repressed. They're unconscious. That is because between the ages of 6 and 12, children want to expand their social contacts and make friends, friends who they can be friendly with. And the last stage is the genital stage. That occurs once puberty hits. And we know that children can experience puberty at different ages. This is when Freud says that once again, children are focused on their genitals and this time becoming sexually intimate. So now people want intimate relationships with others and want to explore their sexuality. During the phallic stage, Freud says that an Oedipal complex exists for young boys. And if you've ever read the book Oedipus Rex, it tells us about a boy's unconscious sexual desire for his mother and his hatred towards his father. So according to the Oedipus complex, a male will compete with his father for his mother's attention and want to replace him, then feel guilt and fear of punishment, and as a result, start to identify with his father and develop a conscience. Boys fear their father due to castration anxiety, the fear that his father will castrate him and get rid of his penis. So he rejects his mother and identifies with his father. Girls should not feel left out because during the phallic stage, psychoanalysts also say that girls experience what's called an Electra Complex, which is very similar to the Oedipus complex, which is that girls have what's called penis envy, and they blame their mothers for their anatomical deficiency. There are people who believe that girls desire their father and want to get rid of their mother, and they're angry at their mother for not protecting them, for not having a penis, and then ultimately reject their father and identify with their mother for healthy development. Freud said that we have 3 levels of our psyche: the id, the ego, and the superego. So we're going to talk about those 3 levels. The id exists at a very unconscious level. So think about little kids. For the id is the part of us that's animalistic and wants what it wants. It operates on what's called the pleasure principle. The whole goal of the id is to seek pleasure and avoid pain, to only have instant gratification. So if you think about young babies will cry because they want milk. They will cry because they want to be picked up right away, and they may not stop until they get what they want. They don't understand, hey, wait until this bottle is warm, or wait until I make your food. They want it right then at that moment. That's how your id is. It operates on pleasure. Give me what I want. The ego develops after the id, and it works on the reality principle. The ego's job is to negotiate between the id, which is seeking pleasure, and what's going on in the environment. Many people think of your ego as your conscience. It's what everybody sees as your personality. Your ego is what tells you you can't always get what you want. So it has to help the id resist its urges. For example, when little kids go into stores and they see candy and they want it, by the time their ego has developed, their id is going to tell them, get that candy. You want some M&Ms, you should have them. But your ego is going to say, it's wrong to steal. Mommy, can I have this candy? Instead of just taking what you want. The superego is the last to develop, which happens around age 5. It's also unconscious. It is us knowing the difference between right and wrong. So it is the ego's job to mediate between the superego and the id, because sometimes the superego can make us make too much of the, or keep us too much by the book, or too far to the left, whereas our ego's job is to help us maintain balance and not make extreme decisions. There are many people who criticize Freud's work. They say that he only studied wealthy Caucasian women in Austria. His results for the things he said are not easily verifiable. It's hard to test. They don't have any predictive power. And Karen Horney, who was another psychologist, said that just as Freud believes there's penis envy, there's also womb envy, which tells us that men are also jealous of women because of their ability to have children. Now let's talk about some other neo-Freudians, some people who practice under the psychodynamic perspective, which that is an extension of psychoanalysis, who came after Freud. Alfred Adler believed that behavior is purposeful and goal-directed. He said that people have what's called an inferiority complex. Carl Jung talked about archetypes and the personal and collective unconscious mind. Karen Horney came up with the ideas of basic anxiety and adult personalities, which she believed helped shape a person's childhood relationships with their parents. So Adler said that people have what's called a style of life, a unique mixture of their personal and social perfections that help lead them in a particular direction. He also said that some of the tensions people experience early on in their life are social in nature and not sexual, as Freud had said. That inferiority complex, he said, starts in childhood and continues to grow as people start to compare themselves to others. He is considered the father of humanistic psychology. Carl Jung emphasized some of Freud's ideas on the unconscious mind, but he said the libido is responsible for many things in life, not just sexual things. He said people have a personal unconscious mind and a collective unconscious. Your personal unconscious has to do with everything that you repress in your life. Your collective unconscious is whatever is inherited and common to all members of a species. It's collective to our species as a whole. Karen Horney agreed with Adler and said that things are social in nature, and she started the feminist psychology view and, of course, challenged Freud's view of womb envy. Trait theorists like Alport, Cattell, and Einzig said that different traits will help describe a person's personality. They believed that we can describe a person's personality based on how we describe them as people, as honest, lazy, ambitious, outgoing, etc. Those traits tend to be stable, according to trait theorists, across your lifespan. Alport said that there are three kinds of individual traits: cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. Your cardinal traits are things that people use to identify us. For example, Scrooge is seen as stingy and cold-hearted. Our central traits are things that make us predictable. She's a flirt, he's assertive. Secondary traits are things that have less of an influence on us, like our preferences in food and music. Other theorists also said that personality traits can be related, and that was Cattell and Einzig. Einzig said that there are two dimensions of personality. There's emotional stability versus emotional instability, just as there is introversion versus extroversion. Einzig came up with this chart that shows that people have they can vacillate between these four colors depending on where they emotionally are. And you can go on any internet site and take one of these personality profiles. Modern trait theorists also believe in what's called the Big Five theory of personality, which says that people have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, also known as ocean. The Big Five trait theory tells us that there are things that are important to us in our social and interpersonal interactions with others. Here are some different ideas that can be expressed through the Big Five. People who score low in these areas have these characteristics on the left, and people who score high have the characteristics on the right. So how do we get into a person's unconscious mind? We do so through hypnosis, dream interpretation, free association, and testing. The Thematic Appreception test, or TAT, involves giving a person a picture that could have many meanings and asking them to come up with an answer about it. Freud said these types of tests will reveal manifest content, what a person remembers, and then also latent content, things that are hidden. Here's an example of the Thematic Appreception test. A researcher would give a person a card and say, "Can you tell me a story about what you see?" And you would have to come up with a story about that scene, which will reveal some of your inner feelings. The Rorschach Inkblot test is one of the popular projective tests, which is a series of 10 ink blots that people are asked to tell what they see. It's often used in forensic settings. Projective tests can be criticized because they lack reliability, consistent results, and validity. Like, does it measure what it's supposed to measure? The MMPI is an objective test which has a series of questions people answer about themselves. It's over 500 questions. It's important that people remember the Barnum effect, because oftentimes people see themselves in vague descriptions like horoscopes and astrologers. Those are all considered pseudo-psychologies and not rooted in psychological science. The behaviorist theory of personality says that most people think the way most people think of personality is meaningless, that personality changes depending on where you are. If you're with your parents, you behave one way, and with your friends, you behave another way. The humanistic theory of personality says that humans have free will and that they're inherently good, and that our self-esteem and self-concept makes up our personality. Carl Rogers was a popular humanistic psychologist who believed in self-actualization. He says that people should be able to reach their highest potential, and people are like acorns, that they need soil, sun, and water. They need encouragement to be able to grow to their full potential. And the way he said people can do that is by having genuineness, unconditional positive regard or acceptance, and empathy. And he said those are the three conditions that are necessary for a therapist to have with their clients. Be genuine or real. Accept your clients and show them empathy. Show them that you understand the perspective they're coming from. Rogers also believed in the idea of a self-concept, having a positive view of yourself. Unconditional positive regard, having love and acceptance with no strings attached, is one of the things that he says makes therapy effective. People go to therapy because they know they won't be judged. A self-concept is how a person feels about themselves. How do they think they are capable of doing things? When people have self-efficacy, they believe in their ability to do something, and they have a positive self-concept. Albert Bandura said that self-efficiency is the term for self-confidence. He believed in reciprocal determinism, which is the interplay between personal factors, the environment, and behavior. Julian Roeder said that your personality and behavior are determined by what happens to you and reinforcement that's attached to that situation. Reciprocal determinism is the idea that our traits, environment, and behavior all influence who we are. That idea was created by Albert Bandura. How we interact in our environment affects our personal factors and our behavior. In order for somebody to assess themselves, they have to be aware of their self-esteem, how they feel about their own life, and self-efficacy, how confident and competent they feel to do things. You can have high self-esteem but low self-efficacy, and vice versa. Lastly, positive psychology is the field of psychology focused on people looking at the positive characteristics and positive things that happen in their life. It is through humanistic psychology, and it attempts to help people focus on human fulfillment. Martin Seligman is the guru of positive psychology. The last thing, the difference between optimism and pessimism. A person who is optimistic looks at the positive things in life instead of focusing on the negative events of life. People who are more positive tend to get more out of life. They tend to be happier. And the goal of positive psychology is to help people develop into positive beings. That is everything you need to know about personality.